The Midwest Central Railroad and Midwest Electric Railway and Midwest Old Threshers grounds is located in McMillan Park in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and the address is 405 East Thresher Road in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. And also, Midwest Central Railroad started in 1960 with only 2 logging steam locomotives that were put in a railroad auction down in Georgia. Midwest Central Railroad's line is on the north end of McMillan Park. Also, the track of Midwest Central Railroad is 36-inch gauge and gives train rides mostly during events, which are sometimes 4th of July and Midwest Old Threshers Reunion, and that event is the largest thresher show in America and was started in 1950 and had taken place 5 days ending on Labor Day every year round. And Halloween events, Midwest Haunted Rails, along with the Great Pumpkin Train and North Pole Express. Midwest Central also has 2 station stops, which there is a North Station and a South Station. Also, Midwest Central Railroad has been giving people rides for many years, and the generation still continues as well. White Pass in Yukon 1131 was built by Pullman in 1942 and is a flat car. Originally, this car was built as a boxcar and was originally used on the Ferrocarril del Estado, which is in Spanish for Argentine State Railway, but in 1942 was sold to United States Army and transferred to the United States Navy. In 1959, it was sold to the Oahu Railway and Land Company, and then in 1962, it was sold to the White Pass and Yukon Railroad, and then rebuilt into a flat car and used on freight trains on the White Pass and Yukon Railroad. Then later on, the car was retired, and in 1995, it was sold to Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and is one of the numerous of flat cars on the Midwest Central Railroad today, and sometimes gets hauled or sometimes has parts just set on top as well. Denver and Rio Grande 3007 was built by American Car and Foundry in St. Charles, Missouri in 1904 and is a boxcar. This car was probably built as a caboose or flat car originally, then in 1925 rebuilt as a boxcar. Also, Denver and Rio Grande 3007 was used on the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad in the past, on narrow gauge freight trains a lot in the past. Then later on, Denver and Rio Grande 3007 was retired and then was privately owned, located northeast of Fort Collins, Colorado. The previous owner planned to convert this boxcar into a caboose, but luckily he didn't even get that far. Then it got returned to its former glory as Denver and Rio Grande 3007 and came to be part of the Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa in 2013, and repainted and restored and in its former glory look, and can sometimes be seen rolling around on freight train sets on Midwest Central Railroad or on train sets when train rides on Midwest Central Railroad are happening as well. Denver and Rio Grande 6216, I believe, was built in like the 1910s or 1920s or 1930s or later on. And it is a narrow gauge flat car. Denver and Rio Grande 6216 was used on the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad and hauled loads that a flat car like this one may have hauled in the past. Also, Denver and Rio Grande 6216 then later on came to be part of Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, like the 1970s or 1980s or later on, and is one of the numerous of flat cars on the Midwest Central Railroad today, and sometimes gets hauled around on the trackway, or sometimes has parts, stuff, and whatever set on top. And one time had a steam thresher ride on top back in 2008. And probably before 2008, it had been being restored, wood needed replacing, sides needed some touch-up work as well. And with the steam thresher riding on it, it may or may not happen again in the future, but I'm unsure if it might or might not happen again.
What you see right behind you is White Pass in Yukon.
White Pass in Yukon 1156 was built by Pullman in 1942 and is a flat car. Originally, this car was built as a boxcar and was originally used on the Ferrocarril del Estado, which is in Spanish for Argentine State Railway, but in 1942 it was sold to United States Army and transferred to the United States Navy. In 1959, it was sold to the Oahu Railway and Land Company, and then in 1962 it was sold to the White Pass and Yukon Railroad and then rebuilt into a flat car and used on freight trains on the White Pass and Yukon Railroad. Then later on, the car was retired, and in 1995 it was sold to Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and is one of the numerous of flat cars on the Midwest Central Railroad today, and sometimes gets hauled or sometimes has parts just set on top as well. Midwest Central Railroad 14 was built by the Plymouth Locomotive Works in Plymouth, Ohio in 1965 and is the 6453rd diesel locomotive built by that factory and is a diesel hydraulic switcher. Midwest Central Railroad 14 has Cummins diesel power. This locomotive operated at the Carbon Limestone Company in Hillsville, Pennsylvania as Carbon Limestone D14. Originally, the locomotive operated on 38-inch gauge track when working at the Carbon Limestone Company, Then Service Machine Equipment purchased Carbon Limestone's operation in 1983, and due to their unfavorable opinion on the railroads, the fleet of diesels were left largely abandoned, and the locomotive, along with its sister D9, was founded by Midwest Central Railroad volunteers in the early 1990s, and were both purchased, and both of them were taken over to Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and the locomotive was yellow when it was abandoned and was carried over to Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and repainted to the paintwork it has on and restored to operation, and then was regauged to 36-inch gauge at the Midwest Central Railroad shop in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, before entering service on the railroad. Today, Midwest Central Railroad 14 is also used basically for shunting and sometimes hauling the trains around McMillan Park in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and still operates today. In 2019, it was taken over to Kansas City, Missouri to Worlds of Fun to help move the steam locomotive on the Worlds of Fun Railroad around while the boiler wasn't working. And then, this locomotive has returned to Mount Pleasant in time for the 2019 Midwest Old Threshers reunion and can still often be seen operating on the tracks as well.
Right behind you is White Pass and Yukon 903.
White Pass and Yukon 903 was built, I believe, between 1950 and 1970 and is a steel caboose. White Pass and Yukon 903 was once used on the White Pass and Yukon Railroad, which is in Alaska. White Pass and Yukon 903 was originally painted in its original color, which it is currently. Then, like somewhere between 1975 and 1980, White Pass and Yukon 903 was painted with 4 colors of stripes. Bottom color is blue, and going up, white, small orange stripe, and roof and cupola was painted black. White Pass and Yukon 903 was once used behind freight trains in the past when it was used in Alaska. White Pass and Yukon 903 is the only caboose that received the Federal Industries tricolor paint scheme. This color scheme is known as Flying Meatball or Bankrupt colors. As the White Pass and Yukon went into financial difficulties in the 1980s and had to close operation in late fall 1982, White Pass and Yukon 903 was then stored in North Vancouver and then was shipped to Mount Pleasant, Iowa around 1990. White Pass and Yukon 903 is one of 3 remaining White Pass and Yukon steel cabooses, and it is now has white letterings and been repainted to green and yellow stripes like it was before today. White Pass and Yukon 903 is mostly used for the winter event at Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and when running, and can often be seen sitting in the yard, especially during Old Threshers event. Also, White Pass and Yukon 903 is known to be the green caboose of Midwest Central Railroad as well.
What you see right behind you is Denver, Rio Grande 3366.
Denver and Rio Grande 3366 was built by American Car and Foundry in St. Charles, Missouri in 1904 and is a box car. This car was probably built as a caboose or a flat car originally, then in 1925 rebuilt as a box car. Also, Denver and Rio Grande 3366 was used on the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad in the past, on narrow gauge freight trains a lot in the past. Then later on, Denver and Rio Grande 3366 was retired and was part of the Helfin collection, and also lived in Colorado Springs, and I believe maybe in 2013, Denver and Rio Grande 3366 was purchased from the Helfin collection and came to be part of the Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and sometimes can be seen part of train sets or just standing stationary whenever not being used. And Denver and Rio Grande 3366 can be seen part of Midwest Central Railroad where it is today.
What you see right behind me is White Pass and Yukon 1170.
White Pass in Yukon 1170 was built by Pullman in 1942 and is a flat car. Originally, this car was built as a boxcar and was originally used on the Ferrocarril del Estado, which is in Spanish for Argentine State Railway, but in 1942 it was sold to United States Army and transferred to the United States Navy. In 1959, it was sold to the Oahu Railway and Land Company, and then in 1962, it was sold to the White Pass and Yukon Railroad and then rebuilt into a flat car and used on freight trains on the White Pass and Yukon Railroad. Then later on, the car was retired, and in 1995, it was sold to Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and is one of the numerous of flat cars on the Midwest Central Railroad today, and sometimes gets hauled or sometimes has parts just set on top as well.
I'm going to show you the Midwest Electric Railway and talk about it. So, let's do.
Midwest Electric Railway is a non-profit educational organization. It was all started in 1971, and the goal at that time was to preserve historic electric-powered passenger trolleys that had operated in Iowa and transport passengers around the campgrounds during the Midwest Old Thresher reunion. The original trolley stops were the trolley depot, the trolley barn, and Camper's Gate. Also, Midwest Electric Railway even operates trolleys during some events as well. Trolley stop currently include the trolley depot, the trolley barn, the log village, Midway, formerly known as Lakeview, South 40, and Camper's Gate stations. Also, Midwest Electric Railway operates 3 trolleys from foreign countries, 2 from Brazil, 1 from Italy. Most of the trolleys you see on Midwest Electric Railway are trolleys that were built in America.
what you see right behind me is Rio de Janiero 1779.
Rio de Janiero 1779 was built in 1911 in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and is an open-air trolley. Rio de Janeiro 1779 ran in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and has operated till 1967 and became part of a group of cars that came to the U.S. The design of these cars is called a Narragansett style, after a type developed by the Brill Car Company of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The interior woodwork is constructed of a Brazilian hardwood called Piroba de Camp. Rio de Janeiro 1779 joined the Old Threshers Collection and Midwest Electric Railway in the 1970s in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Also, Rio de Janeiro 1779 has also been operating on Midwest Electric Railway since then, and still does whenever Midwest Electric Railway trolleys are operating. Also, Rio de Janeiro 1779 was painted yellow a long time ago and then repainted to being green.
What you see right behind me is Waterloo, Cedar Falls, and Northern 381.
Waterloo, Cedar Falls, and Northern 381 was built in 1930 by Pearlie Thomas for Knoxville, Tennessee. Waterloo, Cedar Falls, and Northern 381 was used for hauling people around on trolley lines in the past. Then Waterloo, Cedar Falls, and Northern 381 was retired in 1958. Waterloo, Cedar Falls, and Northern 381 was the last streetcar to operate in Iowa. August 1st, 1958. It was preserved by the city of Waterloo and transferred to the Midwest Electric Railway in Mount Pleasant, Iowa in 1972. Waterloo, Cedar Falls, and Northern 381 has also been operating on Midwest Electric Railway since then and still does whenever Midwest Electric Railway trolleys are operating.
Right behind me is Milan 1945.
Milan 1945 was built in 1927 in Milan, Italy, and is a Peter Witt type trolley car. Milan 1945 was used on trolley railways in Italy till 2002 and hauled people around the trolley line in Milan, Italy, and then was shipped to North America and was brought to the Midwest Electric Railway in Mount Pleasant, Iowa in 2002 and was the newest car added to the collection. Also, Milan 1945 has also been operating on Midwest Electric Railway since then and still does whenever Midwest Electric Railway trolleys are operating. Rio de Janiero 1718 was built in 1911 in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and is an open-air trolley. Rio de Janeiro 1718 ran in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and has operated till 1967 and became part of a group of cars that came to the U.S. The design of these cars is called the Narragansett style, after a type developed by the Brill Car Company of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The interior woodwork is constructed of a Brazilian hardwood called Piroba de Camp. Rio de Janeiro 1718 joined the old Threshers collection in Midwest Electric Railway in the 1970s. Also, Rio de Janeiro 1718 has also been operating on Midwest Electric Railway since then, and still does whenever Midwest Electric Railway trolleys are operating.
Right behind me is Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin 320.
Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin 320 was built by the Jewett Car Company in Akron, Ohio in 1914 and is an interurban car. One of a group of wooden interurban cars built. This 52 passenger capacity car is 48 feet long, 8 feet wide, and capable of speeds in excess of 80 miles per hour. Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin 320 ran on streets in Chicago suburbs and operated between Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin, Illinois, from 1914 through 1961. It has been on display and in service at Old Threshers since 1968. Also, Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin 320 was then restored to operation and operates on Midwest Electric Railway in Mount Pleasant, Iowa today, and has also been operating on Midwest Electric Railway since then and still does whenever Midwest Electric Railway trolleys are operating.
Right behind me is Argent Lumber Company 25.
Argent Lumber Company 25 was built in 1923 and is a Model T Ford Foreman's truck. Argent Lumber Company 25 was originally a vehicle used to run on roads and was then converted to being on narrow gauge tracks and as an inspection vehicle. Argent Lumber Company 25 also was used for inspecting tracks on the Argent Lumber Company and was used for hauling crews on board. Also, Argent Lumber Company 25 then came to be part of Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa in 1960 when the two steam locomotives were purchased and can often be seen running and trailing behind trains, and along with the Model A, they are known as the railroad's toys on the rails, but are still running and even often giving visitors rides or just trailing behind trains. as well. Denver and Rio Grande 705 was built by American Car and Foundry in St. Charles, Missouri in 1904 and is a gondola car. Denver and Rio Grande 705 was used on the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, hauling whatever gondolas hauled, like coal or anything it has hauled before. Also, Denver and Rio Grande 705 was later converted as a riding car and used on the Georgetown Loop Railroad in Silver Plume, Colorado for giving rides. Then in summer 2015, Denver and Rio Grande 705 then came to be part of Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, where it is today, and can be seen part of train sets whenever the trains of Midwest Central Railroad are operating. Denver and Rio Grande 201 is like a replica baggage coach and is one of the coaches on Midwest Central Railroad constructed from freight cars from various railroads, including the Southern Pacific, East Broadtop, and the Westside Lumber Company, and constructed at the Midwest Central Railroad shops using Southern Pacific flat cars as a foundation. Also, it is known as the Quinn car because it was used by CBS and made an appearance in the production Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman in 1994. Also, Denver and Rio Grande 201 is often used as one of the coaches used on train sets on Midwest Central Railroad whenever the Midwest Central Railroad has trains running in McMillan Park in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul 55 was built by Ohio Falls Car Company in Clarksville, Indiana, around 1880, and it served on the Bellevue and Cascade originally in northeast Iowa until the line closed around 1936. It was the railroad's only caboose. After the Bellevue and Cascade shut down, one of its engineers bought the caboose and kept it on the property as storage. It sat outside rotting away for decades before moved to Mequeoketa in the 60s. By this time, its condition was very bad around 1980. Around 1980, Jim Schroeder purchased what was left of the car and got to work on what became a very impressive restoration. He meticulously replaced all of the rotten wood, creating an exact copy of each piece. He reused what hardware could be. He could, but nearly all the wood is new. When finished, he used the car as sort of a guest house. In 2004, Midwest Central Railroad volunteer Phil Boris contacted the Schroeder family some time ago and got the ball rolling on this project. Mrs. Schroeder was moving and the family needed to find a home for the caboose. Right after the 2004 Old Thresher reunion, Matt Kroll and Jesse Van Winkle drove to Bellevue to talk to the family and look at the caboose over. The family felt the Midwest Central Railroad would provide a good home for the car, and plans were started to transporting it. This would be the hard part, hiring an outfit to truck it would be very expensive because the size and location it's at in up a steep driveway with trees around it. After much brainstorming, Matt Kroll came up with a combine head trailer that they could rent and that Midwest Central Railroad could rent. It was nearly the right length with the wheels at the body bolster of the car, and it sat low enough that height would not be a problem. Mounts that bolted to the trailer were fabricated as soon as the 2004 Ghost Train was over. In 2004, some of the volunteers headed to Bellevue and loaded up the car. Mark Kroll provided the truck to pull the trailer and all the tools required to fasten the caboose in place. The caboose was jacked up. Then trucks rolled out and was loaded. They took it slow and everything went well and pulled it into Mount Pleasant Sunday afternoon. The move was a big success. It had been on the rails now for over a decade. Occasional maintenance to the caboose running gear, body, and frame has kept this beauty in running condition. It sees service at nearly every operating event at Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and used behind train sets whenever Midwest Central Railroad has the trains operating. Also, Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul 55 is the red caboose on Midwest Central Railroad as well. Surry, Sussex, and Southampton 6 was built by Baldwin in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1891 and is the 122/88 steam locomotive built by that factory and is a 260 Mogul type steam locomotive. Surry, Sussex, and Southampton 6 was once a logging locomotive in force for the Surry, Sussex, and Southampton Railway in Dendron, Virginia, and originally had a straight stack, extended smoke box style kerosene headlight, and a vertical stave pilot. In 1899, the locomotive was converted to burn coal. In 1903, the original headlight was replaced with a 2-inch smaller box headlight. The headlight was again replaced in 1913, but this time with a round case. However, the size remained the same. Sometime before 1914, the original Baldwin straight-capped stack was replaced with a Venturi-shaped cast stack, and the plate pilot wheel replaced with a spoked pilot wheel. Then in 1925, Surry, Sussex, and Southampton 6 was retired, and it was held on to by the factory that built it, and then in 1936 was used for the Argent Lumber Company in Hardyville, South Carolina, and retained its original number. And the locomotive went back to burning wood and added with iron cab and Rushton stack, which is a balloon-shaped smokestack. In 1955, it suffered a crown sheet failure and the engine crew lost their lives, but the engine was soon rebuilt. Then the locomotive was then put for sale at a railroad auction in Georgia, and the locomotive was one of the first 2 steam locomotives bought by the Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa in 1960, and then moved to McMillan Park in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and is the first locomotive to operate on the Midwest Central Railroad and was the main rod engine until 1971 when it was taken out of service. In 1988, it came out of one of the most in-depth rebuilds in the country. Also, Surry, Sussex, and Southampton 6 is named Maria as well. Also, Surry, Sussex, and Southampton 6 was then used operating on the Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and hauling visitors around as one of the steam engines of Midwest Central Railroad. Surry, Sussex, and Southampton 6 was originally built to burn wood, and it still burnt wood when it came to live in Mount Pleasant, then later was converted to burn oil. Then in 2008, Surry, Sussex, and Southampton 6 went out of service for an overhaul just for a couple of years, and then in 2010, Surry, Sussex, and Southampton 6 operated on Midwest Central Railroad's tracks once again after a 2-year absence. Also, Surry, Sussex, and Southampton 6 appeared in the 2010 movie Dogjack, and one of the movie locations was at McMillan Park in Mount Pleasant. In 2016, a part on the running gear on the engineer's side produced a crack, and then it was soon welded back together. Also today, Surry, Sussex, and Southampton 6 is like the only remaining Surry, Sussex, and Southampton 260 today, and is one of 4 surviving Argent Lumber Company 260s remaining in New Berlin and Winfield 2, and Argent Lumber Company 1 can be seen here at Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant with it, and this one can be seen operating on Midwest Central Railroad's tracks during operations of Midwest Central Railroad. As well as that, Argent Lumber Company 3 is down at the Southern Forests World Museum adjacent to the Okefenokee Heritage Center down in Waycross, Georgia, and is the only 260 from Argent that isn't in the fleet of Midwest Central. Also, Surry, Sussex, and Southampton 6 is also known to be the oldest operating steam locomotive in the state of Iowa as well, and also the oldest locomotive on the Midwest Central Railroad as well. Midwest Central Railroad 200 was constructed in Midwest Central Railroad shops from freight cars from various railroads from either Southern Pacific, East Broadtop, or Westside Lumber Company. Also, Midwest Central Railroad 200 is also named Mignon and was built from scratch on one of the 4x30 wood-framed truss rods flat cars brought from the Southern Pacific's abandoned Keller branch in 1961. It was designed by partially copying an 1865 coach model. The Mignon was rebuilt in later years when the coach needed some remodeling. Also today, Midwest Central Railroad 200 is used on train sets on Midwest Central Railroad whenever trains are running, and carries visitors on board whenever the Midwest Central Railroad has the trains running as well.
What you see right behind you is the Midwest Central Railroad.
The Midwest Central Railroad Caboose is the first caboose for Midwest Central Railroad that grew from plans of a Florence and Cripple Creek caboose in April 1959 issue of Railroad Model Craftsman. Its builders noted it was most likely the first time a replica caboose was built in reverse from model plans with its windowed cupola. It quickly became the most popular car for riders, Also, the Midwest Central Railroad Caboose is also used on train sets on the back mostly. On the Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa at McMillan Park, giving people rides whenever the trains are running, and is the yellow caboose on the Midwest Central Railroad as well. Midwest Central Railroad 303 is one of the coaches on Midwest Central Railroad, constructed from a freight car from various railroads, including the Southern Pacific, East Broadtop, and the Westside Lumber Company, and constructed at the Midwest Central Railroad shops using Southern Pacific flat cars as a foundation. Also, Midwest Central Railroad 301 is often used as one of the identical yellow coaches on the train sets on Midwest Central Railroad whenever the Midwest Central Railroad has trains running in McMillan Park in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Midwest Central Railroad 302 is one of the coaches on Midwest Central Railroad, constructed from freight cars from various railroads, including the Southern Pacific, East Broadtop, and Westside Lumber Company, and constructed at the Midwest Central Railroad shops using Southern Pacific flat cars as a foundation. Also, Midwest Central Railroad 302 is often used as one of the identical yellow coaches used on train sets on Midwest Central Railroad whenever the Midwest Central Railroad has trains running in McMillan Park in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Midwest Central Railroad 202 is one of the coaches on Midwest Central Railroad, constructed from a freight car from various railroads, including the Southern Pacific, East Broadtop, and Westside Lumber Company, and constructed at the Midwest Central Railroad shops using Southern Pacific flat cars as a foundation. Also, Midwest Central Railroad 202 is often used as one of the identical yellow coaches used on train sets on Midwest Central Railroad whenever the Midwest Central Railroad has trains running in McMillan Park in Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
What you see right behind me is Denver and Rio Grande 6206.
Denver and Rio Grande 6206 was built by American Car and Foundry in St. Charles, Missouri in 1918 and is a narrow gauge flat car. Denver and Rio Grande 6206 was used on freight trains in the past for the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad and hauled loads that a flat car like this one may have hauled in the past. Also, Denver and Rio Grande 6206 then later came to be part of Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, like in the 1970s or 1980s, and is one of the numerous of flat cars on the Midwest Central Railroad today. It used to have items like parts set on top and one time and even huge shop equipment, and then before the 2017 reunion, it was rebuilt as a riding car, and also it can even be seen being hauled on the train on the Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and people riding on board it as well.
What you see right behind me is Westside Lumber Company, Elgin.
Westside Lumber Company Elgin was built by Ford and Westside Lumber Company in 1930 and is a Model A Ford Fireman truck. Westside Lumber Company Elgin was also used on the Westside Lumber Company whenever it was inspecting tracks mostly, and was used for hauling crews on board. Also, Westside Lumber Company Elgin then came to be part of Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa in 1966 when the Shay was purchased, and can be often seen running and trailing behind trains along with the Model T. They're known as the toys on the rails, but are still running and even often giving visitors rides or just trailing behind the trains. Also, 2 weeks before the 2017 reunion, it was repainted to being black because that was the color it was when delivered to the Westside Lumber Company, till it was later repainted yellow and bought by the Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. And also, there used to be a window on the back and then got removed, and the wall was put in this spot as well.
What you see right behind me is Denver and Rio Grande 5713.
Denver and Rio Grande 5713 was built by American Car and Foundry in St. Charles, Missouri in 1904 and is a stock car. This car once hauled cattle from farms to whatever destination in the past on the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad for many years. Then later on, the car was retired and was part of the Georgetown Loop and converted to being used as a riding car, and was carried on the Georgetown Loop Railroad on trains as well. As well as that, it was lettered Georgetown, Breckenridge, and Leadville, but abbreviated. Then in 2004, it was then moved to the Colorado Railroad Museum in Golden, Colorado. Then, in summer of 2015, the car came to be part of Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. It was still how it was till 2020 and was reunited with its Denver and Rio Grande abbreviation. Today, it is also used on train sets whenever trains are operating as well.
What you see right behind me is the water tower.
The water tower is an authentic steam-era water tower that came from the Missouri Short Line Railroad, Bavarian Southern Railroad. This water tower was added by 1964 to fill up the locomotives and needed as much 4,000 gallons at each filling. Also, this water tower had to be rebuilt because of a leaking problem. It is now part of the narrow gauge in McMillan Park where the reunion grounds are. Probably back in 1985, the Midwest Central Railroad rebuilt this water tower and was rebuilt when the Midwest Central originally got it, and it has a metal tank inside it, and originally had the wood and tank out there and would leak a lot then, and build metal linear tank that sat inside used for that, and the water tower used to sit on the east side of the south station. Then the foundation underneath it got rotted and wood poles held it up and was about to fall over, and it was taken down and reworked everything and gotten everything worked properly and rebuilt a new steel underframe for it, then set it up at the North Station. Also, today the water tower can be seen by the North Station and can be seen used for filling water into the steam engines whenever Midwest Central Railroad has their steam engines running.
What you see right behind me is the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Hillsboro Depot.
The Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Hillsboro Depot was built in 1880 and was originally located in Hillsboro, Iowa. This depot was originally used by the Fort Madison and Northwestern Narrow Gauge Railroad for many years, and also it was used for passengers to buy a ticket and even sit in the waiting room while waiting for a train as well. Then, in 1901, the Fort Madison and Northwestern was acquired by the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad, and the depot was still used in passenger service right into the early 1950s. Also, the tracks that used to go through Hillsboro were removed. Then, in the late 1950s, it was moved to Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and carefully moved by truck and put in this spot on the north end of the Midwest Old Thresher grounds. And also today it acts as the North Station on the Midwest Central Railroad as well. Also, the building was furnished with a waiting room, ticket office, and freight room. The depot didn't look like the way you're seeing it today, because what I mean is on the east side of this structure had nothing when it was located in Hillsboro, Iowa. And then after it came to Mount Pleasant, it was added with a platform and later a gutter which extended the roof where people could wait to board the train when it's like a rainy day to stay dry, or a hot day to have some shade as well, and the area features some benches. After it was put in this spot, it was painted yellow till later it was repainted red, which is its present color as well. Also, the freight room used to be a gift shop till the 2017 reunion, and nowadays it's like used as a storage room as well. Right here is a Velocipede, which the person would sit on this seat, pull this back, and it would move down the tracks. This was used for inspection, but that was what was wrong with having three wheels to run on tracks. But nowadays, those days are over. But sometimes I think this is often brought outside. But I think it just stays right here, though. This is a Handcar that's right here, and also this was bought from the auction in South Carolina or Georgia with the 2 steam engines, as well as the other maintenance equipment. And this one came off the Argent, like I said, and it was bought in 1960 for Midwest Central. And also sometimes when it's here, it can even be put on the tracks, and even the people like to do handcar races with it. However, it's the only handcar here. It was repainted in 2020 as it was looking dark paint work. So here it is today. It says it was built by Fairbanks Moores in Chicago. Right here's a flatbed that once carried supplies for the Argent Lumber Company. It was acquired the same time 6 and 2 were acquired from the auction, and today it's on Midwest Central Railroad, used to carry like ballast and tools and such. And yeah, here it is preserved today. It wasn't like this when it got here. I think it was yellow at one point, and then about 2019 or 2018 it was painted to look like this, the way you're seeing it. Okay, you could see right here is a Fairmount Speeder that came off the Argent Lumber Company. Sometimes this runs on the Midwest Central Railroad, and today it is here today after being used at Argent in South Carolina. And when it was retired, it was bought at the auction with the 2 and the 6 in 1960. And here it is today at its happy home. What you see right behind me is Fredrick Snare Corp 2. Fredrick Snare Corp 2 was built by Vulcan Iron Works in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania in 1935, and is the 4175th diesel locomotive built by that factory, and is a gas switcher type diesel locomotive. This locomotive is known as the Squirt and was originally owned by the Fredrick Snare Corp in Grafton, West Virginia, and was used to move rolling stock around at the facility. Then later on, the locomotive was retired and then was sold to Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and when it arrived in Mount Pleasant, it was repainted yellow and numbered as Midwest Central Railroad 101, and for many years, it had been used as a yard goat on the railroad. Then in 2016, it was repainted to black, and also It is even used for shunting equipment around as well. Also, it is one of 2 surviving gas switchers from the Fredrick Snare Corp, and number 5 is at the Yosemite Mountain Sugar Pine Railroad in Fish Camp, California, and number 2 can be found here at the Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, where it is today.
What you see right behind me is Carbon Limestone Company D9.
Carbon Limestone D9 was built by Plymouth Locomotive Works in Plymouth, Ohio in 1956 and is the 5902nd diesel locomotive built by that factory and is a diesel hydraulic switcher. This engine has a Cummins diesel power. This locomotive operated at the Carbon Limestone Company in Ohio. Originally, the locomotive operated on 38-inch gauge track when working at the Carbon Limestone Company. Then, Service Machine Equipment purchased Carbon Limestone's operation in 1983, and due to their unfavorable opinion on the railroads, the fleet of diesels were left largely abandoned. Then the locomotive, along with its sister 14, was found by Midwest Central Railroad volunteers in the early 1990s, and were both purchased, and both of them were taken over to Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and the locomotive was yellow when it was abandoned, and was carried over to Mount Pleasant, Iowa. It was re-gauged to 36-inch gauge at the Midwest Central Railroad shop in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, before entering service on the railroad. In 2009, the Midwest Central Railroad volunteers began performing restoration to get it rolling again. It had to be repainted, and this is its original paintwork on it. It even had its parts worked on as well. In 2021, the engine started rolling under its own power just in time for the Midwest Old Threshers reunion. Today, the engine is also used basically for shunting and sometimes hauling the trains around McMillan Park in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and operates today as well, just like its sister.
What you see right behind me is Midwest Central Railroad 301.
Midwest Central Railroad 301 is one of the coaches on Midwest Central Railroad constructed from freight cars from various railroads, including the Southern Pacific, East Broad Top, and the Westside Lumber Company, and constructed at the Midwest Central Railroad shops using Southern Pacific flat cars as a foundation. Also, Midwest Central Railroad 301 is often used as one of the coaches used on train sets on Midwest Central Railroad whenever the Midwest Central Railroad has trains running in McMillan Park in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and also it is named Mount Pleasant, and it used to be painted green, and the sideboards under the windows saying Mount Pleasant has likely been put in storage or maybe thrown away. And also in 2016, the coach had to take a year off from being used at the Thresher reunion that year because of a repaint and restoration, and it got repainted maroon. and it then went back into service afterwards, but while it was still being repainted, it was being used after the reunion of 2016. Also, as the car was repainted, the handbars even got repainted white, and today, this car operates on Midwest Central Railroad whenever the train is running as well.
What you see right behind me is Westside Lumber Company 9.
Westside Lumber Company 9 was built by Lima Locomotive Works in Lima, Ohio in 1923 and is the 3199th steam locomotive built by that factory and is a 3-truck shay type steam locomotive. Originally, it was built for the Hetch Hetchy and Yosemite Valley Railway as Hetch Hetchy and Yosemite Valley 9. In 1925, it then became Pickering Lumber Company 9. Then in 1934, it was then used on the Westside Lumber Company as Westside Lumber Company 9. In 1958, it was used by the Pickering Lumber Corp, but it was still lettered as Westside Lumber Company 9. Also, the locomotive was used as a logging locomotive for many years. Then, when the logging railroad closed, Westside Lumber Company 9 and other locomotives that worked the Westside Lumber Company were retired and sat idle, and the engine was sold to fiberboard paper in 1965, where it was kept for a while. Then, in 1966, the shay was sold to Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and was carried to Mount Pleasant by flat car on a freight train and then carried to the Thresher Park by truck. Westside Lumber Company 9 has operated on Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa since then. In 1998, some extensive work took place on Westside Lumber Company 9. In 2011, the Georgetown Loop Railroad took possession of the Midwest Central Railroad shay Westside Lumber Company 9, and it arrived there that year, and in 2012, the Midwest Central Railroad took possession of the Kahului Railroad Prairie 12, and in 2011, the lease was formed by Midwest Central Railroad and Georgetown Loop Railroad to swap the two locomotives. And Westside Lumber Company 9 has been operating on the Georgetown Loop Railroad tracks between Silver Plume and Georgetown starting in 2012 and has been used for exciting most of the rail fans on the Georgetown Loop Railroad in Colorado like it did on the Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, before it left Mount Pleasant, and has been operating on the Georgetown Loop Railroad till 2018 and was stored at the Georgetown Loop and awaited to be moved back, and the lease with the two locomotives expired. Westside Lumber Company 9 returned to McMillan Park in Mount Pleasant, Iowa in 2019 and operated at the 2019 Old Threshers reunion, and then, before rolling again, it had driveline work to be done on it, and once again back in service on the Midwest Central Railroad. Also, Westside Lumber Company 9 is one of 7 remaining Westside Lumber Company shays surviving today, and they're all 3-truck shays, and 9 is also used on the Midwest Central Railroad in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and even is used operating on the tracks today as well.
What you see right behind me is the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Yarmouth Depot.
The Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Yarmouth Depot was built likely somewhere in the 1800s or early 1900s and originally was in Yarmouth, Iowa. This depot was once used for passenger service on the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad many years ago. The original structure was much larger, and not only that, the living quarters was for the rail agent and his family. The line it served was the Burlington and Washington branch of the railroad. In 1940, the depot was reduced to its present size by the railroad. Then later, the depot was retired and the tracks that used to go through Yarmouth were removed. Then in 1959, it was moved to the Midwest Old Threshers Park in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and was originally used as the trolley ticket office and gift shop. Also today, the building is currently used for storage and acts as the main trolley station on the Midwest Electric Railway as well.
What you see right behind me is Northern Pacific 1781.
Northern Pacific 1781 was built by the Northern Pacific Railroad in 1923 and is a wooden caboose. It was used on the back of freight trains many years ago as the train crew's office, and also is one of the many wooden Northern Pacific cabooses built as well. Then, when the Northern Pacific merged to form the Burlington Northern Railroad, it was renumbered as Burlington Northern 10975 and painted in the Burlington Northern's green and white paint scheme. Then later on, it was retired and in 1982 was bought by a private individual and was later moved to the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, and used as a bunk facility there. Then, in 2019, it was bought by a member of the Midwest Central Railroad and was moved to this spot at the Midwest Old Threshers grounds in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Today, it sits adjacent to the Midwest Electric Railway trolley barn on the grounds as well.
What you see right behind me is Iowa Interstate 9703.
Iowa Interstate 9703 was built around like the 1900s and is a hopper car. This car was used on the Iowa Interstate Railroad for many years and used to haul different types of cargo such as like rocks, coal, gravel, rubble, and many different types of cargo it may have hauled many years ago and being used on mixed traffic trains or on a train with hopper cars. Then in 2016, it came to Midwest Electric Railway in McMillan Park in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and in 2017, it had been repainted with the Iowa Interstate stripe as well, and also it is likely used as a ballast car for the Midwest Electric Railway as well.
What you see right behind me is Union Electric 1100.
Union Electric 1100 was built by American Car Company in Canton, Ohio, and is a flat motor trolley. Originally, this car was used for the Mississippi River Power Company in Keokuk, Iowa, as Mississippi River Power Company 1100 and used on the Keokuk Dam across the Mississippi River and served the hydroelectric generating station. Also, the car has a submarine-like appearance because the operator's cab of this work motor is raised above the deck to allow long length of the deck. After an ice storm heavily damaged the overhead electric wire of the railway Emerson, Missouri, which is the Union Electric Company, decided to replace the flat motor with a diesel. In 2002, it was then donated to Midwest Electric Railway in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and used likely for track inspections mostly as well. Also, the cab was painted orange for a while till 2016 it was repainted gray. Today, this locomotive can be seen preserved here at Midwest Old Threshers on the Midwest Electric Railway in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, where it is today.
What you see right behind me is Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority 3279.
Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority 3279 was built by the Boston Elevated Railway in Boston, Massachusetts in 1912 and is a line car. This car was used for the Boston Elevated Railway in the Boston area. Also, the car was originally a dark color whenever it worked in Massachusetts and later repainted yellow, and it was used to keep the overhead electric wires that the trolley gets their power from in good working order, and also it's nicknamed as Cheese Box because it comes from the resemblance to popular cheese products. In 1947, it was then used on the Boston Metropolitan Transit Authority and still having the original number. In 1964, it worked for the Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority. Then, in 1995, it was soon retired and was donated to the Midwest Electric Railway in Mount Pleasant, Iowa by the Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority, and also it is likely used for track work, most likely, and preserved at the Midwest Old Threshers grounds on Midwest Electric Railway today. Okay, you can see right here is a speeder used by Midwest Electric Railway. It is clearly unknown where it would have been used, probably by Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, but who the heck knows? Is my guess it could have been, but here it is today. It looks like a Fairmount speeder to me. Okay, you can see right here's the flatbed, one of the flatbeds. This is the yellow one that they use here to carry spikes and such, and tools even to maintain the track. And here it is today at the Midwest Electric Railway. Okay, here is two more that you see behind me, and they look a bit different than the one you just saw, and yeah, they're likely used as well. Well, I hope you all enjoyed learning about trains with me today in Matthew Lapp Train Guy segment show. Also, I hope to see you all again in the next segment, and if you didn't subscribe to my channel yet, the subscribe button is just down below, and yeah, please subscribe, it's free to do so. And if you didn't